Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to see everyone. Today's Torah portion is double. It's Tazria and Metzora, which in the Blue Scroll Chumash is found on page 608. We get to read it. We had the privilege of reading a double portion this week of Tazria and Metzora. So, at first glance, the name of the two portions don't seem compatible. They seem like they're opposites. The first name of the first portion is Tazria. Tazria means giving birth, conceiving and giving birth. Isha ki Tazria, it's the laws of childbirth. What are the laws of a woman who gives birth, whether it's a son or a daughter? That's the opening of the first Torah portion, Tazria, birth and creation of new life. The second Torah portion that we're going to read, because we have a joint Torah portion, is Mitsura. Mitsura means a leper. And it talks about someone who speaks Lashon Hara, gossip, slander, and in biblical times, the punishment was leprosy, like Miriam when she spoke slander about her brother. Moses was afflicted with leprosy. Actually, the first instance of leprosy was when Moses was approached by God at the burning bush and told to go redeem the Jews from slavery. And Moses said, well, the Jewish people won't listen to me. And God gave him various miracles to demonstrate that God sent him. And one of them was put your hand in your cloak and take it out. And his hands was full with leprosy, afflicted. And then he put it back in and it was cured. And the message that God was showing him with this sign was that you spoke slander against the Jews by assuming the worst, that they will not believe rather than that they will believe. So we know that leprosy is an affliction for speaking gossip, slander, and we'll get to that later. But for now, the question is, how can you have two Torah portions joined together when one means life, birth, and the other one means leprosy? Because the Talmud says that there are certain people who are considered as though they're dead, meaning their affliction is so severe and so grave that it's like being dead. And one of them is a Mitsura. Mitsura chashuv kameis, the Talmud says. A Mitsura is like as though they're not alive. So one Torah portion is life, and one is the opposite of life. So how do the two Torah portions go together? And the Lubavitcher Rebbe answers it by saying the following. He says that when the Torah prescribes a punishment, it's not for the sake of punishing the person. It's for the sake of transforming the person. In other words, today our jails are called, not rehab, they're called, I'm slipping my mind now. Not detention centers, not rehab, but rehabilitation centers. Meaning that the purpose of our judicial system and our incarceration of people is to rehabilitate them. That's the ideal, that's the goal. And obviously some prisons do that more effectively than others. But clearly in the Torah, the objective of a punishment is to teach the person a lesson. And in the case of tsaras, the affliction of being a leper and having to be quarantined outside of the community all by yourself in isolation was meant to teach the person the pain of negative speech. Because when you speak negatively about others, whether you realize it or not, you are isolating the person, because you're causing people to look at them negatively and therefore distance themselves from that person. And therefore, you are causing that person the pain of loneliness. Now, one of the greatest gifts that God gave us is the gift of speech, which allows us to communicate and be connected to one another, which cures our loneliness. And God gave us the gift of speech so we could create bridges from one soul to the next. When you use speech in a counterproductive way, it's going contrary to the intention of God, which was that words should bring people together, and it's causing people to become alienated, separated, distant from one another. So by forcing the person to be quarantined and sit in loneliness for 7 days and have no one to talk to because they're all alone, because no one could come close to them because they have this leprosy, you are learning the pain that you've caused someone else through your words that have isolated them, and learning a new appreciation for the gift of speech, so that when you are brought back into the community after the days of your leprosy are over, you will appreciate the gift of speech and utilize it properly. One of the things I have hanging on my wall, sitting on my shelf, says, be sure to taste your words before you spit them out, which means, how would you like if those words were used against you? I'll get back to the question how Tazria-Metzora comes together, and the answer is that since the goal of Mitsura is to make the person into a new person, a person that uses their speech properly, therefore the two Torah portions have the same message. Tazria is about conception and birth. Mitsura is about a person going through the cleansing, the rehabilitation process of changing their ways and becoming a new person. Human beings are called midaber because they have the ability to communicate intelligently. Now you're a new person who uses their speech properly. It's a new, fresh start, a new beginning in the way you communicate. So they actually share the same idea. A very beautiful story I just want to share with you about the power of speech and negative speech. There was a great rabbi in a certain city who was not only a great scholar, but he was a wealthy man. And people would come to him for scholarly advice, but also for financial support because he was very charitable. And one time, a poor man, Zalman the tailor in town, needed some money, and he came to borrow money from this rabbi / banker. And he was in the middle of learning. He said, sure, I'll help you. He gave him a certain amount of money. A couple of months later, he came back to pay him, and he was engrossed in a Talmudic passage, deeply engaged in learning, and he took the envelope when he returned the money, and he put it in his book, and he kept on learning. And when he finished learning, he forgot about it. He folded it and put it on the shelf and forgot about it. A while later, he called the Zalman the tailor to pay his debt. He said, I paid you. He says, I don't have any recording, because he never put it in the ledger that he paid. So he took him to a hearing to swear that he paid him. And in Jewish law, if you take an oath that you swore and the other guy has no proof, then you don't have to pay. But when word spread that Zalman the tailor denied or went to a court hearing, denying that he did not pay back and claiming he paid back, people took the side of the rabbi, scholar / banker, who was knowledgeable and scholarly and philanthropic, and started to shun Zalman the tailor's tailor shop, to the point that he was put out of business. He barely earned a meager living, and now he was really out of business. So he had no choice but to uproot his family and move to a different city and start all over again. A while later, a couple of years later, the rabbi is going through his books, and he comes across this envelope from Zalman the tailor with all the money in it, and he realized what happened. So he inquired what happened to Zalman the tailor, and they said he moved away. He found out where he moved to. He went and traveled to his city and said, I beg your forgiveness. It was my negligence that I didn't record that you paid me back. As a result of that, you were driven out of town, shamed, accused falsely of not paying. Please come back to town. I'll set you back up in business. And Zalman said, it's too late for me to come back. Nobody likes me. Nobody wants to do business with me. The rabbi said, I'll tell everyone that you were innocent, that it was my mistake. And they said, they're not going to believe you. They're going to think you're just being kind to me. And the rabbi felt terrible. He said, I caused you all this pain and embarrassment, and I have to be able to make it up to you. And he said, it's too late. The damage is done. And finally, the rabbi said, I have an idea. You have a daughter, I have a son. Let's make an arrangement between our children. And then if we marry to each other, people will realize you're an honest person. And that's what he did. A shidduch was made between their children. They liked each other. They got married. And when everyone saw that the rabbi and the banker is marrying this Zalman the tailor, his family, they realized that it's true that he was innocent. But it just shows you the extent of the harm that words can do and how difficult it is to undo words. Like the famous story of the Jew came to the Chafetz Chaim. He said, I spoke negatively about others. How could I atone? He said, take a feather pillow and rip it open on a windy day. He did it. When he came back, he said, am I forgiven? He says, no, now you got to collect all the feathers and put them back in the pillow. He said, that's impossible. They're blown all over town. He says, the same thing with your words. Your words have spread from one courtyard to the next, from one home to the next, from one rooftop to the next. Everyone in town is talking now. There's no way you could put the feathers back in the pillow. So the Torah's prescription for someone who speaks gossip or slander, which is worse than gossip. Gossip is when it's true, slander is when it's false, but either way it's forbidden. As I often say, in Judaism, you could tell the truth and commit a sin when you speak Lashon Hara. And you could tell a lie, a white lie, and be doing a mitzvah, because the Talmud says when someone asks you about something, like, what do you think about my bride? Or what do you think about what I've acquired? Rather than tell the truth, if I say to you, do you want to hear the truth, or do you want to hear something kind? So, the truth hurts sometimes. So you don't tell the truth. You tell a white lie and say something that's kind, so that you do not offend the person. So you could tell the truth and be committing a lie, a sin, and you could be telling a lie and be doing a mitzvah, so to speak. So the Torah's prescription is that the person is put into leprosy. Now I'm going to go back to Tazria, the Torah portion about childbirth. And, if you don't learn something beyond the surface, you could get the wrong impression. And here's one example. The Torah says if a woman gives birth to a girl, it starts with a boy. If you give birth to a boy, the mother is unclean for 7 days. And then on the 8th day, you circumcise the boy. And then for 33 additional days, bringing it to a total of 40 days, she should count days of cleanliness until the 40th day. And then she comes to the temple and brings an offering. That's if it is a boy. I just want to take this call for 1 second. Hello? Yeah. I'm in the middle of it. Yeah, go ahead. Thank you. Sorry, I had to take that call, but basically, on the 40th day, she then is done with her counting and she brings an offering. If it's a girl, it's double, 14 days of uncleanliness, and then she counts 66 days and brings an offering. So there's 3 general questions on this opening passage. The first one is, why does childbirth create impurity? There's nothing more beautiful, miraculous, wondrous than giving birth to a child. Why would that make the mother unclean? Second question is, why the discrepancy? If it's a boy, it's only 7 days and 33 days, as opposed to a girl, it's double, 14 and 66. And here you may say, well, it seems like the Torah is saying that a girl causes a greater degree of impurity, a boy causes less. Maybe the Torah is chauvinistic or something like that. And then the third question is, why does she bring an offering to the temple when she concludes her purification period? So regarding the first question, this is part of a broader subject of purity, impurity, cleanliness, uncleanliness, holiness, and the subject of mikvah. And we know that a woman, when she menstruates every month, she is unclean for a period of time. And the question is why? And the answer is that when a woman menstruates, it represents the fact that there was a potential for the creation of life, and it was not fertilized, it was not realized. Now we know that in Judaism, what causes impurity? The opposite of life. When someone is deceased, it causes impurity. Well, even when there's a monthly potential for life that's not realized, that's not actualized, that also causes impurity every month. And the same thing is true with the childbirth, that as a result of the child being born, there's then obviously the blood of the birth, and therefore the woman is in a state of uncleanliness. However, the question then becomes, why doubly long for a girl? And here we find the following, that when we talk about the birth of a boy, it's a tremendous miracle, which means that a woman gave birth to a life. But with a girl, it's considered a double miracle. Why? Because that little baby girl has within her the potential to give birth to a baby in the future. So it's a miracle within a miracle. And therefore, it causes a double period of uncleanliness and a double period of purity following that. So it's actually because a girl's birth is a greater miracle in the sense, because within that little baby girl is already everything necessary to one day give birth to her own child. So it's like a miracle within a miracle. Now, why does she wait till this time before she comes to the temple? And why does she, and bring her offering to God? And the answer is that God is saying to the mother, you have the beautiful gift of a new child. Don't come to the temple. Eventually come to the temple to thank God. And that should be your first stop. Until today, women, when they leave the home after giving birth, after they come up from the hospital, the first place they'll go is to the synagogue, even before they go to the pediatrician's office. So the question is asked, do women substitute anything in today's day for the temple offering? Yeah, they come to the synagogue and say a prayer. So I've seen women who, okay, the first time they take the baby out of the house to go to the first month or whatever it is, the first week, 2 weeks later, a pediatrician visit, they'll stop at the synagogue to say a prayer. But what God's saying is, don't rush. When you stand over your newborn's crib, you are looking at the divine. You're looking at a miracle. You're in the presence of God. And this foundation of starting the child's life is signaling to the mother that you don't always have to feel that I'm conflicted between staying home with my child versus going off to the synagogue or going to do some other good deed. Women are pulled in many directions today, whether it's work or other responsibilities. And what it's saying is, when you spend time with your child, whatever age or stage, you are in the presence of God because you're caring for this beautiful child and raising this child properly and influencing and inspiring this child. So you don't have to feel like, oh, I gave up going to synagogue in order to be with the baby. Being with the baby is in the greatest presence of God. And therefore, a woman should not feel conflicted sometimes that she has to give up other responsibilities in order to be home with her child. You can't get any closer to God than standing over the cradle, the crib of your newly born child. So this is some of the ideas in the opening section of this week's Torah portion. And now we're going to transition into something else. And I just want to point out something interesting. It's a little bit off the topic, but the word Tazria is from the word zera. Now, English, it says if a woman conceives, but the word for Tazria is like a zera, like a planting, like a seed, because what's conception? The conception is that the man's seed is being implanted in the woman. So it's like fertilization. It's like germination of a new life. Just like when you plant a seed in the ground, something begins to grow. The word zera is similar to the word Tazria. And there's an interesting question, and that is, we know that in Jewish law, the night that is preferable for husband and wife to be intimate is Friday night. And the question is, one of the 39 labors that we're not allowed to do on Shabbat is plant. Planting is forbidden on Shabbat. You're not allowed to plant. So the question is, how come you could plant genetically, so to speak, with your spouse and be intimate with your spouse on Friday night? If you conceive on Friday night, aren't you planting? Aren't you violating that law of not planting on Shabbat? Why is it permissible? And a number of answers given to this question. But one answer is the obvious answer, and that is that unlike planting in the physical sense that requires labor and requires a specific skill set to know how to do it and utilize the ability to plant. This is something that happens almost automatically. It's not like you are, yes, you're having relations, but you're not planting in a specific way that it would be considered a malacha. Malacha has to be something that is a labor, that is a specific effort, and that takes a certain skill to know how to do it, so to speak. God does it pretty much for us. So that's just an interesting sidebar. But now we're going to transition into what is going to be the main subject of the rest of the Torah portion and the subsequent one, which is the subject of saras, leprosy. Now, today we don't have leprosy, And in those days, it wasn't the type of leprosy that we think of today. It wasn't a physical ailment. It wasn't something you went to a dermatologist for. You went to the Kohen, who was a spiritual guide, because it indicated something wrong in the soul of the person. So what comes out on the skin, on the surface, is a reflection of something deeper. A person who speaks ill of others shows that they're not well. Something interesting to note is that the word ill versus the word well, the difference is ill is I, and well is W-E, we. When a person only thinks of themselves, they're egotistical, then they're prone to speak negatively of others. When a person thinks of we, that person is in God's image just like I am. He may not be in my image, but they're in God's image. They're God's children. To tie it back to what we said before, we talked about what do you say to someone who, the Talmud has a discussion, if you go to a wedding and the bride is not so graceful or beautiful, or she's even handicapped or lame or whatever it is, do you say she's a beautiful and graceful bride? And Beis Shammai says, no, you say something good about the bride, but you don't lie. And Beis Hillel, who we rule according to, says, no, you say Kala Nava Chasuda, she's a beautiful and graceful bride. and Beis Shammai says, how could you lie? The Torah says you should tell the truth. And one of the answers is you're not lying, because you may not see the bride as beautiful, but the groom does. That's why he chose her. So you're not seeing it from your perspective, you're seeing it from the groom's perspective. And from the groom's perspective, she's beautiful, so it's not a lie. The same thing is true with every human being. We are the bride and God is our groom. You could sometimes look at another person, another Jew, and say, they're not a nice person. But that's your opinion. In the eyes of God, the groom, he's a beautiful person. That's why God created that person. So therefore, you have to learn to see things from God's perspective. So a person who is ill is only thinking about themselves. A person who is well, W-E, that's thinking we're all in God's image. That person is beautiful. God doesn't make junk, as the billboard once said. So the person comes to the Kohen because he needs not a physical remedy, he needs a spiritual remedy, because the skin is a reflection of the ailment and the infection, so to speak, that's in his soul, that is showing up on the skin, that something's wrong in their soul. Because if you have a need to criticize others, to judge others, to speak ill of others, to badmouth others, or even worse, to spread rumors about others, then there's something about you that you're insecure, or you're unhappy with yourself, or maybe you are angry, or whatever it may be that's causing you to do this. So you need to look within yourself, because the Baal Shem Tov said that your fellow man is a mirror. What you see in someone else is really a reflection of you. The reason God showed you someone else's shortcomings is because God wants you to look within yourself. So the Kohen is to help the person spend these 7 days in isolation, to reflect, to ponder, to examine their own deeds, and try to become well rather than ill. Go from I to we. Now, the process would last for 7 days, and then the Kohen would come and examine. If the skin healed, that means he learned the lessons, he could be reintroduced into the community. If not, he had to stay another 7 days, and so on and so forth. Now, before we talk about Lashon Hara, which is a term everyone knows, Lashon Hara, bad, negative speech. Again, we mentioned that the human beings are called midaber because we're communicating beings. So our power over animals, and surely over plants and inanimate objects, that we could speak intelligently and we could utilize the power of speech properly. But just like you have Lashon Hara, negative speech, the inverse of that is Lashon Tov, good speech. So it's not just about not speaking negatively, it's more about speaking positively. So, for example, you have Chilul Hashem, desecration of God's name. You should never cause a Chilul Hashem, do anything that would be a disgrace to God's name as a Jew. Well, of course, you shouldn't do that. But how much greater is it if you not only don't cause a Chilul Hashem, but you cause a Kiddush Hashem? You do something that brings honor and acclaim and recognition and praise to God's name. And so, when we talk about Lashon Hara, of course, we have to control our speech. As someone said, Smart people talk about ideas, average people talk about things, and foolish people speak about other people. but more than that, we have to say to ourselves, do we utilize speech in the most productive, positive, beneficial manner? And we're learning Pirkei Avot. The custom is in the 6 weeks, the 6 Shabbatot between Passover and Shavuot. We learn one Shabbat, each Shabbat, like this Shabbat, we study the first chapter of Pirkei Avot, next week the second one, every week another chapter. And one of the teachings in Pirkei Avot says that there was a great rabbi, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, who had 5 students. And he would, Hu Haya Monesh Vachan, he would list their praises. And it lists what each one of these students' praises are, and then he decides which had the greatest qualities, and so on and so forth. But the introduction to this teacher says Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai had 5 prize students, and Hu Haya Monesh Vachan, he would count their praises. And one of the interpretations is, how did he develop these 5 great students who each one became a great rabbi and sage unto themselves? Because he would constantly repeat their praises. In other words, if you point out somebody's strengths, you will motivate them and inspire them to have the confidence to pursue it even more and to develop it even further and to achieve it even greater. So what it's saying is, yes, how did he achieve these 5 great students? Specifically by being Monesh Vacham, by listing their praises. So obviously we're not talking about flattery or false praise, but we're talking about when someone does something good. If you go over to someone who did something good and you compliment them genuinely and sincerely, they will always smile. Why will they smile? Because it's like you held up a mirror to themselves. You showed them something about themselves that maybe they weren't recognizing, and you say, you have such a great quality, the way you did this or the way you did that, and it shows them their own goodness. And when you show somebody their own inner goodness, you motivate them to want to do more of that because you highlighted it. And therefore, Hayam Monash Shivchan, he would list their praises. And the same thing here. There's Lashon Hara, but on the other side, there's Lashon Tov, always speaking positive words. And while Lashon Hara is something we have to refrain from doing, Lashon Tov is always something we say, if someone did something nice, tell them how much you appreciate it, express it, because that will build that. Just like with children, when you point out what they did right, you encourage them. The same thing with adults as well. Now, someone's asking the question, and I love questions, what if one is subjected to hearing it? What should one do? Very good question, because the Talmud says that gossip or slander kills 3 people: the speaker, the listener, and the one it's spoken about. So we understand why the speaker, it kills that person spiritually. Why the one who is spoken about, they're being bad-mouthed, slandered, gossiped about. Their reputation is being soiled. But why the listener? And the obvious answer is that if someone's speaking gossip to you and you refuse to listen, you'll do 2 things. First of all, they don't have anyone to talk to, so they'll stop speaking Lashon Hara because they don't have a choice because you won't listen. But furthermore, you will make them realize that just like, you wouldn't go into a building and smoke a cigarette, even if you smoke. Why? Because you respect other people. They don't want to inhale those toxins and get sick. Well, just like you don't want to pollute the ear physically, when you speak gossip, you're sitting around the table and you stop gossiping, you're polluting people's minds and hearts and souls. You're polluting it with a negative image of that person. And who gives you the right to pollute other people? So just like if you pull out a cigarette in a restaurant, people would jump all over you and say, excuse me, sir, take it outside. That's the way we should react if someone speaks Lashon Hara. Excuse me, I don't want to hear that. Please don't speak anything negative. Now, it's very hard socially to do that. But if people heard that response, they wouldn't even think about pulling out a cigarette in your presence. So you may have to do it once, you may have to do it twice, but eventually people won't say Lashon Hara to you. But unfortunately, people think, I want to be polite. I don't want to be rude. I don't want to be offensive. So I'm going to let him say what he wants to say. But that's like saying if someone pulls out a cigarette and starts smoking, I don't want to be rude and impolite, so I'll let them smoke in my face and blow the smoke into my lungs and nostrils. But furthermore, the reason it kills the person who listens is because you now have a negative image of that person. In other words, there's a person that you thought highly of. You had a positive image. And now whenever you see that person, you have in your mind what you heard about that person. So you're tainted. You're really affected by that because you have a dimmer, more pessimistic, more cynical, more negative perspective on someone else. And that's a big shame. It's killing you. It's killing part of your soul and your positive perspective and outlook. Excuse me. So, yes, in Jewish law, not only shouldn't you speak Lashon Hara, but you should not even receive it or hear it or listen to it. The Talmud goes so far to say that, on the outside of your ear, there's these two little pieces of cartilage that protrude here. And the Talmud says the reason God made these two little pieces of cartilage is that if you're hearing Lashon Hara, you could press them in. And when you press in these two pieces of cartilage, you can no longer hear. And basically what the Talmud is saying is if someone refuses to speak and you can't leave the space, literally you should press your fingers in and say, I do not want to hear this, and deafen the sound of what is being spoken to you. So yes, all three are affected: the speaker, the listener, and the one that is spoken about. Now, when the Torah introduces the laws of gossip, which is chapter 13, the Torah says a person who will have a skin of the flesh that is one of the three colorations, different shades of white, like an egg, like the membrane of an egg, like snow or like wool, different shades of white that you and I maybe wouldn't know the difference, but the Kohen knew how to detect it. He should be brought to Aaron, the high priest. Now, right away, is an interesting expression. He should be brought to Aaron, the high priest. You would think he should go to Aaron, the high priest. Why should he be brought? Who's bringing him to Aaron, the high priest? And one of the answers is, in today when we talk about people who are not well, psychologically, emotionally, spiritually, there's something called intervention, which means very often the person, even though they see the negative side effects of their behavior, whatever their addiction is, they don't see the need to go get help. And family and friends have to intervene and say, look, we think you need help. We're going to get you the help you need. That's the idea, that the person who's the gossiper or the slander, they may not feel like they're doing anything wrong. They may not recognize their own frailty or their own, imbalance internally that's causing them to do this. So it takes the family members, the friends, to bring this person to the Kohen and say, look, this person has this leprosy, they need help. Please, if the Kohen, who is the man of kindness, and that's why it's the Kohen is a person who is looking out for the best interest of the Jew, and therefore will look with loving eyes, because if someone's going to judge somebody, they have to be looking out for their best interest. So therefore the Kohen, he should be brought to Aaron the Kohen. And it goes on to say that the Kohen shall decide whether the person is clean or unclean, and if he's found to be unclean, he should be quarantined for 7 days. Now, today we really know what the word quarantine means. We hear it a lot. We're very, very familiar with it. But in those days, the person was literally taken outside of the camp, and they couldn't even be with their own family. Now, it's very interesting that the word for affliction is the word nega. And if you rearrange the letters of the word nega, which means affliction, it could be ayin nun gimel, which means oneg, delight, pleasure. So what is going on here? That the word for affliction could be pleasure and delight. And then the verse says that the Kohen shall see this nega, this coloration of the skin, and then it talks about when the Kohen goes to check on the person the second time to see if the discoloration has changed or not. once again, there is an emphasis on the Kohen looking, the eyes of the Kohen, and it actually says that the color of the skin has not changed, and it says it did not change at Eino. Now, the word Eino could mean its color, but it could also mean its eye. Ayin is an eye. And what the Torah is telling us is that the eyes is one of the most powerful tools, gifts that God gave us. Every day we open up two gifts, which is our two eyes. And the eye could be the source of seeing affliction or causing affliction, or the cause of the greatest pleasure. What we choose to focus on and see, whether in ourselves or in others, could be a cause of affliction for a person, pain, aggravation, or it could be a source of oneg, of pleasure. And, God gave us two eyes, and obviously we have to use our right eye to look at others. And part of the cause of Lashon Hara, it doesn't start from speech. It's how we perceive things in the first place. So a person who speaks negatively, the question has to be, why is that what you noticed in the first place? Why did your eye go there? Now, there are times that you have to look at circumstances and make judgments. So obviously a judge, or if you're in a position that you have to judge something. But if it's not something that pertains to you, you're not out to look to help the person, to advise the person, if you're not the person's doctor or therapist or rabbi or counselor, why would you focus on their negative? Every person has good or bad. Why not focus on the oneg, on the part of the person that will bring delight, that will bring pleasure, that will bring goodness? And furthermore, as I said, the Baal Shem Tov says that whatever you see in another person is really a mirror that God is showing you what you have to look within yourself. And here's a powerful thought from the Baal Shem Tov. He says that this person who is deemed to be someone who has tsaras has to tamei yikra. He has to say, I am tamei, I am unclean. He should call out, which means people should stay away from him, not be in his presence. Although it wasn't contagious, it wasn't like a physical ailment that was contagious, only if you spoke Lashon Hara. But the point is, the Baal Shem Tov says, tamei, someone who is unclean themselves, tamei yikra, will call other people unclean. As the Talmud says, kol haposel, anyone who disqualifies someone else, who points out someone else's disqualifications, bimumo posel, they're usually disqualifying with their own personal disqualifications. Or someone said, when you point a finger towards someone, you're pointing back towards yourself, 3 fingers at yourself. Usually things you accuse others of are usually things that you possess within yourself. So the idea is that it all starts with the eye, and what the eye sees is what the heart will feel, and what the lips will talk about. So if a person finds themselves speaking gossip, they should really look into themselves and say, why is it that I perceive others in that way? And we know that we're always supposed to judge people favorably. We're always supposed to see the good in other people, and so on and so forth. So that is the subject of Lashon Hara, negative speech. The second Torah portion, Mitsura, is even worse. Motzira is somebody who speaks bad about someone else when it's not true, when it's false. A lot of times people say, well, I spoke Lashon Hara, but it's the truth. It doesn't matter. If it's not anyone's business, then it is forbidden. And I just want to say, in our society, you have gossip columnists, gossip shows. People don't even realize it's wrong. And just like you can write a gossip column, you're not supposed to read a gossip column, because it's none of my business what someone else is going through in their personal life. Unless I'm there to help them, why would I need to know their dirty laundry? But Motzira is more like defamation of name and reputation. And obviously, in today's day and age, it's much worse, because we have the internet, we have social media, and unlike the words that were normally spoken and carried from one person to the next, today in an instant it's on the internet, somebody puts something up that's either true but negative or false completely. Sadly, that person's reputation is literally harmed worldwide. So as a result of that, we have to be extra careful about what we forward and what we post and what we write and what we email, because we never know where it could end up and the impact it could have in a negative way. But then again, on the positive side, we have the gift of technology that we could post things that are positive, things that are complimentary, good words about other people, and hundreds or thousands of people could read those complimentary words. So this subject of Lashon Hara and Lashon Tov has never been more important. And I always joke that we all know the iPhone, which is one of the most famous computer devices, has the apple with the bite inside of it. And often wonder why a bite, why a bitten apple? Isn't that ironic? And it all goes back to Adam and Eve. Eating from the forbidden fruit, that bite in the apple, which took some opinions it was that, other opinions it was different things. But the point is, what was the sin? The sin was that the snake spoke Lashon Hara, bad tongue. He went and enticed Eve to eat from it by pushing her against the tree and saying, you see, God never said that you, he said something will happen if you touch the tree, nothing happened to you. And basically, he spoke Lashon Hara. He said to Eve that God just doesn't want you to eat from it because he is threatened by you becoming as knowledgeable as him. And that negative speech caused her to sin and caused Adam to sin. And we, until this day, suffer the consequences of the sin of Adam and Eve, of being banished from Gan Eden and childbirth pains, and man has to live by the sweat of his brow. It all happened from eating from the apple, so to speak. So when you see your iPhone or you see your Apple computer, just look at that apple with the bite and say, okay, make sure I'm not committing the sin of the serpent of speaking negative speech, which has such terrible consequences. Again, if anyone has questions, feel free to put the questions in. One of the fascinating subjects in Mitsura is that there's different forms of leprosy. There's leprosy on the skin, there's leprosy on the garments, and then there's even leprosy on the building, the home. And it's basically like baseball, 3 strikes and you're out. First you get it on your house, the most external facade. Then if you didn't get the lesson and heed it, it then comes to your clothing, and then like mold on your clothing, so to speak. And then eventually it hits your skin. So God gave you stages to realize that you need to stop speaking gossip. But the powerful lesson is that when you speak, the walls of your home, the Talmud says when Mashiach will come, the walls of your home will speak and they will say what they heard. So when you speak Lashon Hara, the walls of your home are absorbing it. Sometimes people say, well, I'm in my own home now, I close the door, it's just me and my wife, I could speak gossip. But the truth of the matter is the walls are listening, so to speak. You should always realize that you're affecting yourself and others, and even if you're alone, your environment is being impacted. And obviously it's a fine line. There are times, like if someone calls you about pertinent information about an employee or about a shidduch for a marriage, you do have to tell the truth in certain times because it's relevant, or you don't want other people to be negatively influenced. So you can't always tell the truth. You sometimes you have to say a white lie because you have to know what you're not allowed to say to hurt somebody or offend someone. But sometimes you can't tell a white lie. Sometimes you have to tell the truth. Absolutely. So if someone says, is this person honest? Can I trust them in business? And you know for a fact that they're not, or whatever it may be, you have to prevent them from getting scammed or marrying the wrong person or hiring the wrong person. So you have to find a way to know how to walk that line and know the laws of when it's permissible and when it's not permissible, what you're allowed to say, what you're not allowed to say. And this is not a simple subject. There are many, many laws about it. It's very complex. And this is the week that we delved into all these laws and try to become more proficient in the laws of proper and improper speech. One of the laws says that when the Kohen comes, he examines the walls of the house, and if he sees that the walls of the house have leprosy, he has to break down the house, remove, like a mold removing company, remove that mold. And rabbis tell us that many times they would remove the mold, meaning when I say mold, I mean the leprosy, the white leprosy on the wall, and they would discover a treasure hidden in the wall that the people who lived in the land before hid in the walls. And the question is, why would the person who speaks leprosy get rewarded by discovering a treasure in the walls of their house? And one of the answers is, when you looked at the wall of this house, you saw discoloration, you saw ugliness. But when you chipped away, you found a treasure. And the lesson is that they're teaching the leper that you are judging this person superficially. You never know what's behind the surface. You never know the person's inner qualities. And every person has treasures inside of them. Don't be fooled or don't be thrown off by the outer appearance of any person or any Jew. Always realize that there is much more than meets the eye, and every person has laden treasures and gifts and talents, and your job is to see beyond the surface and see who the person is truly on the inside, and try to draw out through positive speech their good skills and capabilities. I just want to share a story about the eye. We talked about the eye, oneg, nega, pleasure versus affliction, and it also has to do with the eye, how to see it. The Kohen teaches the Jew how to see it properly. There's a story told about this this Jew who was traveling, and he went to a Chabad house, and he came in. There was exactly a minyan, and there was one Jew there. He wasn't davening, he wasn't holding his sit. He was reading the daily newspaper in the synagogue. And when he came back to New York, he wrote a letter to the Rabbi how disgusted he was to go to this Chabad house, and he sees a Jew in the Chabad house with a newspaper, reading the daily newspaper in the synagogue rather than praying. And he was upset about it. And he was reporting to the Rebbe. And the Rebbe said to him, "You failed to see what was happening there. This is a Jew who is not religious. He doesn't know how to pray. He has no interest in praying. But because the synagogue needs a minyan, the rabbi called him to come and make a minyan. So he bought his newspaper, and he sat there with his newspaper because he's making the minyan so the other 9 Jews can daven and say Kaddish." He said, instead of looking at him like, look at this Jew who comes to shul with a newspaper, look at this Jew who has no interest in praying, doesn't even know how to pray, but yet he's willing to come and sit through the service just to help the Jewish, the synagogue form a minyan so people can pray. 2 people could look at the same set of circumstances and draw completely different conclusions. So it really has to do, they say beauty is in the eyes of the beholder. Ugliness is also in the eyes of the beholder. 2 people could look at the same thing and draw completely different conclusions. So what the laws of Tzaras is saying is, look at that person positively, and then you'll have pleasure and delight rather than pain and aggravation, and you will avoid afflicting yourself with that negativity and with that pessimism and that toxicity that you're absorbing by looking at this person in a negative light. Someone said, treat your friends like expensive paintings, put them in a good light, so to speak. So there's one other idea that the Talmud says, that one of the sins that causes affliction is a tsar ayin. Tsar ayin means a narrow eye. What does a narrow eye mean? Similar. When someone looks at someone narrowly with those narrow eyes, it's like looking with a very critical, judgmental view of that person. So don't be a tsar ayin. A tsar ayin is somebody who's miserly, who's stingy. When I say stingy, don't mean stingy only financially, also stingy with their words, with their compliments, with their generosity of spirit. You could either be generous in your words and your kindness and your appreciation for others and your acknowledgement and your gratitude towards others, or you could be stingy with your words, like have verbal constipation, like you can't say thank you, you can't say I appreciate it, you can't shower the person with proper praise. You look at them in a very narrow way with a narrow eye. So you see how the eye and the mouth are very much connected. And you find this in the Shema. Twice a day we say the Shema. And in the last passage we say, do not go astray after your eyes and after your heart. And the rabbis say the eye sees and the heart desires. What your eye see will affect the way your heart feels, and then the way you speak and act towards that person. And yes, words lead to actions, as we know. Not only that you can't scream fire in a movie theater, but when you besmirch people's reputation, it will ultimately lead, and we know from anti-Semitism that negative words ultimately led to oppression and persecution of the Jews. And that's why words are extremely powerful and important, how we use our words. It's interesting that the word Mashiach, the Messiah, if you take the shin of Mashiach and you move the dot from the right side, which is shin, Mashiach, and you put it to the left side, you have the word Messiah, which means speak, lasuach, to communicate. And one of the ideas is that Mashiach will come when we learn to use our speech properly. And that is one of the most difficult areas of life, controlling ourselves. And often people want to speak negatively of others, unfortunately, because somehow it makes them feel better about themselves. So the Talmud calls it miskabed beklon chavero. You are getting honor at the expense of someone else. By putting someone else down, you're contrasting yourself with them and making yourself feel better about yourself. Oh, they got fired, or they got divorced, or they this or that. Well, I'm not fired. I'm not divorced. That means I'm better than them. So it's like patting yourself on the back at their expense. So as they say, the only thing you should do behind someone's back is pat it, not speak behind their back. And anyone you speak to that speaks Lashon Hara to you, they say a dog that will bring a bone will take a bone. Today they're talking to you about someone else. Tomorrow they'll talk to someone else about you. So you really don't want to have anything to do with people who engage in Lashon Hara. So that is the subject of this week's Torah portions. And like I said, it's something that we're always communicating, whether through verbal speech or through the written word or other forms of communication. And, I laugh a lot of times when somebody will bring up someone else and, and someone says, well, I don't want to say anything about that person. I'd rather not say anything. I don't want to talk, and they think they're not speaking Lashon Hara because they said, well, I'm not going to say anything. That's implying that you have a lot to say that's negative, but you're not going to say it. Well, in a way, that's even worse, because now you left it up to their imagination. Who knows what this person did or whatever. So Lashon Hara doesn't mean you actually said something bad. You may have implied it. The Chafetz Chaim famously once said, based on a verse that says, Ki ba'apam harge ish, with their nostrils they killed a person. I'm talking about Shimon Levi, who wiped out the city of Shechem with their anger, because nostrils was anger. But he said, sometimes with your nose you can kill somebody. Someone says, what do you think about this person for a job or for a shidduch or whatever? And you go, you twirl your nose like, I don't know. You didn't say a word, but with your nose, with one twirl of the nose, you gave it away. You defamed the person already. So it's a very delicate thing that could have many different ways of impacting others negatively. And this is the overriding message of this week's Torah portion, the importance of utilizing our speech properly and never saying anything negative about someone else. On the contrary, doing what is called Lashon Tov, only speaking positive, complimentary words of encouragement and utilizing the power of speech properly. And I'll just share something that the Chafetz Chaim once said, which is yet another. There's many reasons why we should speak properly. First of all, because it's the decent thing to do. Second of all, the Baal Shem Tov said that in heaven they judge people based on the way you judged others. If you gave people the benefit of the doubt and saw the positive in others and you judged favorably, God will judge you favorably, because that's the same judgment you gave others. If you're harsh and critical and negative and accentuate the bad behavior of others, unfortunately, God can do the same for you. But furthermore, the Chafetz Chaim once said that when a person prays, sometimes their prayers aren't answered, and you wonder why. And he said the answer is because imagine a doctor uses an instrument to perform a surgery, let's say, that's contaminated. Not only won't he cure the patient, he'll, God forbid, cause many infections and, God forbid, kill the patient because he's using a scalpel that is contaminated. He says our mouths is a vessel. It's an instrument that God gave us. If we just badmouth somebody with our mouth, we just contaminated our whole mouth. Now we open a prayer book and we ask God for something with the same mouth that's contaminated through negative speech. So how do you expect your prayers to be heard or answered when the instrument you're using is not clean, it's not pure, it's not sterile? So for all of these reasons and many, many more, it's so important to speak positive speech. And to take a resolution, I'm never going to say anything negative about someone else. Obviously, that's very hard. But you could say, you know what, it's 1 o'clock now. Let me work on 1 hour. From 1 to 2 today, if anything comes my way that anyone wants to engage with me in negative speech, or I'm tempted to say something negative, I'm not going to do it from 1 to 2. And then when you see you could do it for an hour, maybe you'll extend it to 2 hours, or maybe at some point you'll do it for 24 hours or for a week. And eventually, you'll rid yourself, because like everything else, it becomes your habit that you don't speak or engage in any conversation that is negative. And all you have to do is have ever been, and everyone has been, on the other end, the recipient of negative speech, where you discover that someone said something negative, and you remember how much that hurts and how painful that is. Then you'll realize a little bit of effort could avoid a lot of pain and suffering and hurt for people. And unlike our society that says sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never harm me, Judaism says words have the power. The pen is mightier than the sword, and the words can have great power and do great harm. And sadly, we've all known that there are many people who unfortunately carry around words that were spoken, whether by parents or teachers or friends, hurtful words that carry on, not just days and weeks, but years and years later, they still can't get out of their head what someone said to them. And it's, had it been a physical bruise, it would have healed and been forgotten a long time ago, but those words live on in their heart. So what we say to others is so important, and we never know which words are going to stick with people. So make sure all your words are positive. And Mari says that on the JWRP trip, they gave red plastic bracelets that said words matter. And that's true. Words do matter. And in a sense, this week's Torah portion is saying that they could even matter more than actions, because if I do a negative action, many times I could undo the negative action. If I steal money, God forbid, I could pay you back and say I'm sorry and make restitution and even pay double payment, right? But if I badmouth somebody, I spread a rumor about somebody, there's no way to make amends, because I'm very sorry. Well, it's too late. People are believing, and people tend to believe what they hear for whatever reason. So how do you undo the damage you've done? It's almost impossible, if not impossible. So you have to be very, very careful, because once a word is spoken, as we all know, you can never take those words back. It's out of your control. You don't own those words anymore. Those words were now heard by others, and others can pass it on and on and on, and you have no control. Before they come out of your mouth, you're in full control. Do I want to say it? Do I not want to say it? How do I want to say it? Once you spoke it, everyone else can do what they want with it. And you always have to think, how will my words be heard? How will they be understood? How will they be interpreted? Not only, it says in Pirkei Avot, wise people, be careful with your words, because maybe you didn't even mean anything bad with your words. But if it was open to the wrong misunderstanding, misinterpretation, look, there's always misunderstandings, and we can't always control what people will misinterpret. But make sure your words don't leave any room for misunderstandings, that somebody could be offended or take it the wrong way. And we're constantly speaking, and I'll just finish with this story. There's a student in a yeshiva talking to his rabbi, and he was talking to a young guy, and he says the word, whatchamacallit. People use the word, whatchamacallit. Whatchamacallit, The rabbi said, don't use the word whatchamacallit. He said, what's wrong with whatchamacallit? He says, whatchamacallit means that you didn't think about what you're going to say in advance. And therefore, it shows you didn't think through what you want to say. Before you speak, as much as possible, try to take a moment, as we said here, to be sure that you taste your words before you spit them out. Then you think about what you're saying. But the most important thing is if you have a good eye and a good heart, and you see the good in others, and your heart is happy for others, you'll tend to naturally, instinctively speak more good than bad. So wish everyone a wonderful day. We thank everyone for joining, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Take good care. All the best.